All right, so now let's actually go ahead and implement authentication in our application, because right now a user can sign up and it can log in, but how do we actually make it so that to retrieve posts, maybe modify posts, a user has to log in and authenticate first? Well, we're going to use something called express sessions. So there's really two different ways of handling authentication. We can use sessions, or we can use JSON web tokens. I decided to use sessions because really I went through all of this process just to show you that we can add in a Redis database. So we can use a Redis database to store our sessions. And you'll see that wiring up an express session to work with Redis is dead simple. And if you actually scroll to the bottom, it actually shows you all the other compatible session stores. So if you want to store it within the Mongo database that we're already using, you can do that. If you want to store it within a Postgres database, if you want to store it in memory, you can. But what we're going to do is we're going to do it with Redis so that I can show you how to deploy one more container. So let's just search for Redis. And here you can see connect Redis. And this will walk you through the whole process of getting express sessions wired up with a Redis database. Now, what we're going to do is before we do that, let's go ahead and actually get ourselves a Redis database. So let's go to our images in our Docker Hub, and I'm going to search for Redis. And there's the official image is going to be the first result. So let's add this. So the name of the image is going to be Redis. So let's go to our Docker compose.yaml. And let's wire this up. So under Mongo, under that service, let's create a new one and give it any name you want, but I think Redis makes sense. And then here, we want to pass in the image, and that's going to be Redis. And once again, I did this in the shared file because both in our production and our development environment, we're going to need a Redis database. Now at this point, right now, if you take a look at my setup and I do a Docker PS, you can see everything's running. So normally you think that you would have to do a down and then an up right afterwards, but there's a shortcut. What we can do is, since we made a change to Docker compose.yaml, we can do an up again, even though everything's already up and running. And Docker Compose is smart enough to know to detect any of the changes that we've made and spin up the necessary services that we've defined. So if we do up and then once again do -d, what's going to happen is it's going to see that we added that Redis database, and it's going to spin up a Redis database. Right? And so you can see both of these are already up to date. So it was able to tell that nothing's changed there, but we did add the Redis, so it's going to go ahead and pull that up. So you'll see moving forward, I'm just going to run the up command just to make any changes take effect instead of having to do a down and then an up, because that's just too long of a process. All right, so we've got our Redis database. Now let's go back to here and let's see how we can wire up this connect Redis and express session. So we have to do an npm install, and then we have to install these three libraries. So we have to install Redis because we are interacting with the Redis database. We do have to install express sessions because we're using the sessions functionality. And then to wire those two up together, we need the connect Redis library. All right, so let's do a npm install. I already forgot what libraries I need. Just going to copy this. We'll install those. And then now, like I said, we can do a down, Docker Compose down, and then do a Docker Compose up with a -- build because we did install new dependencies. So we have to rebuild our node image. However, what we can do is just do an up -d -- build. And that's going to, rerun everything for us. So we don't have to bring it all down. However, there's one more issue. So if I do a -- help, you're going to see that there's this renew anonymous volumes. So when you have a database, sorry, not a database, when you have your containers already up and running, and then you do another up and you want to rebuild the image, what's going to happen is that the already running container for our node application is going to grab the old anonymous volume. And the old anonymous volume has all of our old dependencies and packages that we've installed. But we've installed some new dependencies like Redis. And so we need to force Docker to renew a new anonymous volume. So instead of using the old one, we needed to create a new one and not use the old node modules folder that doesn't have Redis or express sessions. So you can just do a down and then an up with the -- build. like you normally can, or you can do just an up again with the dash dash build, and then make sure you pass in the dash capital V to ensure that we create a brand new anonymous volume. All right, so we've got all of that. Let's take a look at the example. You'll see it's pretty easy. We have to import Redis, Redis, express sessions. We have to create a Redis store. And so it's literally just copy and paste up to here. And then here under under our create client method, we have to specify how to access our Redis database. And then we just pass in this specific middleware that we create. So let's get to it. So let's go back here and let's go to our index.js. And we're going to import sessions first. So we'll do const session equals require express that session. Then we need to import Redis. And then we have to define our Redis store. So we'll do let in this case. So we'll do let Redis store equals require. And then we need connect dash Redis. And then we pass in session. And then let's define our Redis client. So we'll do let Redis client equals require. Sorry, not require. We want Redis dot create client. And then here we have to pass in two things. We have to pass in the URL, the host URL, as well as the port that the Redis server is going to be listening on. All right, so let's go to our config.js and let's define that here as an environment variable. So we'll say Redis underscore URL. And when I say URL, this is just going to be the IP address. So I'll just say process.env.redis underscore URL. And then if that's not set to anything, we're going to default to Redis, right? Remember, we have the DNS at our disposal. So, anytime any one of our containers wants to talk to our Redis database and it needs to know the IP address, we can just reference Redis. So if I go back to config.js, I'm just going to default to Redis. I'm, in production and in development, I'm never actually going to pass this URL in. It's just there so that in the future, if I do decide to have a Redis database that's not a Docker container and that I can't actually resolve using Redis, then I can just pass it as an environment variable and then I can connect to maybe a managed Redis server. So back here, we'll pass in host as Redis underscore URL. And then we also have to pass in the port. So we're going to use the default port for everything, but let's define a environment variable for that. So we'll call this Redis underscore port. And this is going to be set to process.env.redis underscore port. And we're going to define, we're going to default to whatever the default port is for Redis, which is 6379. All right. And then right down here before our first middleware here, I'm going to define a brand new middleware for our sessions. So here we'll then pass in session. And then we have to pass in an object. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to pass in our store. So here we'll call it new Redis store. And then we have to pass in our client that we created. So it's going to be client. And then we're going to reference our Redis client right here. All right. Then the next thing that we have to pass in is a secret. So this is just a random secret that we store on our Express server that we use when we are handling the sessions. So this can be any string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an environment variable for that as well. So we'll go back to our config. And I'm going to create one, and I'm going to call this session underscore secret. And we're going to grab this from process.env.session secret. And so this is going to be session secret. Make sure you import that. And then we have to pass in some properties for our cookie that we send back to the user. And so if you want to take a look at the properties that we're going to pass in, go to the original express-session page. And then here under the options for cookie, you'll see the different options that we have. So we've got expires. So actually, we don't even want that. We want max age. So I think it's somewhere here. Anyways, I'm just going to pass in a couple of the ones that I'm going to use. And then, if you guys want to read up on that, feel free to. But it's not really that important from a Docker perspective. So we're going to do secure. I'm going to just set that to false just to simplify our application. Resave, set to false. Save initialized. HTTP only is going to be set to true. And then max age, this is going to be set to, so this is set in milliseconds. So I just want this cookie to last 30 seconds. It's going to be a little bit, I want it to be that short just because it's easier to demonstrate how these cookies work. I'm going to do 30,000 seconds, 30,000 milliseconds, which equates to 30 seconds. And I know HTTP only, this is just used for scenarios where your JavaScript on the browser will not be able to access it. So HTTP only means that JavaScript can't access it. All right, so we've defined a couple of new environment variables. So let's go back to our Docker compose file. And well, first of all, let's go to dev anyways. So this is going to be the environment variables for our development environment. So let's go down to Redis. And let's set our environment variables. And once again, I made a mistake. These aren't set for the Redis server. This is going to be set for our Node app. And the only thing we need to pass in is our session secret. So we'll do session _ secret. And then just pass in some string. So I'm just going to call this secret. Why not? It's just an arbitrary string. Just think of it as like a password for your sessions. And so now let's do a Docker compose up. However, if we just do a Docker compose up, you'll see that nothing happens because, well, actually something did happen. This is actually perfect. So it recreated the container just because we changed a few things. We changed our environment variables. So it was able to start that. And let's do a Docker PS. We'll do a Docker logs. And then where's our Node app right here? And then we'll just do -f. And it looks like I forgot to import Redis URL. So if I go under index.js, this was never imported. Well, it actually is imported. I just imported it down here. So we just have to cut that out and then move it below this line. And then on port 18, I never actually imported. So this is going to be set to port, and let's import. Actually, is that defined here? We need to make sure. Yep, we didn't. We never. Oh, it's Redis _ port. Okay. Import that. So make sure you import it there. And I think this should fix our issues. Looks like things are good so far. So let's. Well, actually, technically nothing's done yet, but all right, so we've got our sessions wired up. The next thing that we have to do is we have to create a session whenever a user logs in. All right, so now that we've got our sessions wired up, let's try to log in again and see if anything's changed. So I'm going to do a post request to our login route, and I'm going to pass in the credentials to a user that's already been created, and then we'll hit send. We get a status success. And you'll notice that under this cookies tab, there's a 1. So this implies that we received a cookie with the value of 1. And so this is what our cookie looks like. You'll see the domain is set to localhost because that's what our server's running on. And then you'll see our expires section, which is going to expire in 30 seconds. And then some of the other properties like HTTP only set to true. And then secure. Secure is basically if you've set secure to true, that means it'll only work with HTTPS. I'm not going to go over how to set up SSL and HTTPS and all of that. for this video, but in a production environment, you definitely want this set to true, and then usually in development, you just leave it set to false. So let's log in. What I want to do is I want to actually log in to our Redis database and just show you what that looks like, what that session looks like within the database. So I'm going to, we'll Control C out of this. And then let's just do a Docker exec. Well, first of all, let's do a Docker PS. Let's get the name of that container. So Redis. And we'll do a Docker exec -it. And we'll drop into bash. And from here, we can just type in Redis or Redis-CLI. And so that's going to drop us into our Redis database. However, once again, just like we did with Mongo, we can kind of shorten that and just do Redis-CLI. And so now we're in Redis. And to see all of the entries within our Redis database, all we have to do is just type in keys and then star. Right? And you'll see that it returned an empty array. And you might be wondering, why did it return an empty array? We have a session. Well, if you recall, where I set some properties on my cookies and my sessions is that this is only going to last 30 seconds. So the session dies after 30 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-log in. This should create a new session. And then now let's quickly run the same command. And you can see we have a session right there. And if you want to see the details for a session, you can type in get and then the key for that. So here we can just copy that. And I forgot the other quotes. And there you go. So this is the details of that session. It's got some information about the cookie and a few other things. But with this session, we can add any information that we want into this session. So what we ideally want to do is when the user logs in, we want to store the user information within this session. And so if that user information is in that session, then we know he's logged in. If it's not, that means he's not logged in. And the nice part about doing this is that we can store any information we want in this session, even information that's should be private to the user, because the user never gets to see the session. This session resides in our Redis database. It never gets sent out to the web browser the user's trying to connect from. So to do this, let's go to our Auth Controller. And it's very simple. So let's go under our login section. And right before we actually implement the logic for logging in, so right under is correct, what we can do is we can say rec.session. So this is how you access this session object. It's going to be attached to the request object. And we can add in a new property called user. We can create any property we want. And we'll just set that to, let's see, where is he? User. We'll set it to user. And so that's going to take the user object that we found from our database. And only if our password, our login is correct, will we then we will assign this user object to our session. So let's save this. Should restart our app, and let's log in again. And now I'm going to do keys star. We have our session object, and then I'm going to do a get. And now take a look at this. So here, starting at this section right here, this is our user object. We've got the MongoDB ID that assigned it. We've got the username and the password. So this is how we tell that a user is logged in. And then after 30 seconds, you'll see that it goes away. And so if we do a keys star, it's gone now. So now that you have an idea of how the sessions work, let's go back into our index.js and just change this value, because obviously 30 seconds is way too short. We can change just add whatever you want. I just added a couple of zeros. However long you want a user to be logged in, this is the value you set in there. Remember, we use milliseconds, of course. And before we move on, a couple other things. So after a user signs up, we also want to do the same thing. So after he signs up, we want to make sure that we log him in by doing rec.sessions.user and set that equal to new user. And let's test that up. So I'm going to go to sign in or sign up. And we'll just do Sanjeev 5. All right, that worked. We got our cookie. Let's do that. And let's get the details for that session. And we can see it did not work because I do not see any information about my user. So let's take a look and see what we might have broke. And I already see what I broke. So it shouldn't be sessions. It should be session. And so let's sign up with a 6 this time. So we have a new user. And so there we go. So now we can see username Sanjeev6. So now whether we log in or sign up, it's going to assign the user to our session. And so now we can access that user whenever we want to access posts. So now that we have our sessions tracking whether a user is logged in, let's set up the logic to make sure that for a user to either create or delete or update a post or even get posts, depending on how your application works, they have to be logged in. And the way we can accomplish that is by using Express middleware. And a middleware is nothing more than a function that runs before your controller. So this function is going to have a little bit of logic, and all it's going to do is it's going to check that sessions object to see if there's a user property attached to it. And if there is a user property to it attached to it, then it will then forward the request onto the controller so the controller can handle that logic. However, if there is no user object attached to it, then it's going to return an error saying, you're unauthorized to access that, you must log in. So let's create a new folder for our middleware. And I'm going to just create a file called Auth Middleware. And here we're going to create our middleware. And I'm going to call this protect because it's going to protect a route and ensure that a user is logged in to actually access that endpoint. And with the middleware, you get the same thing as any other controller. You get request, response, and then you also get the next object. And so here what we're going to do is we're going to destructure out user from our session. And we're going to say if user does not exist, which means, the user's not logged in, because if there's no user attached to the session object, then we know the user's not logged in. We're just going to return a response that says, first of all, we're going to set the status to 4.1, and then we'll do JSON. And then here we'll say status fail. And then what we're going to do is we're going to send a message that's going to say unauthorized. However, if the user is logged in, then we're just going to say next. So when you call the next function, then or the next method, it's going to then just send it to the controller or the next middleware in the stack. And one optional thing that you can do, and what I like to do is, instead of having all of the rest of our routes get the user off of rec.session.user, I'd rather have it attached directly to the rec object. So I'm going to say rec.user equals user. So now if we ever want to get the information regarding the user, we can just do rec.user instead of having to go to rec.sessions.user. Then we want to make sure we export this. All right, and so now under our post routes, which is the routes that we want to protect, let's import our protect middleware. And to protect a specific route or endpoint, let's grab the post method right here. So this is going to be when a user wants to create a new post. And all we have to do is just pass in protect here. So what's going to happen is when a user hits this endpoint, we're going to run our middleware function. And our middleware function is going to verify if the user is logged in. If he is logged in, then we just call the next method, which then goes straight to postcontroller.createPost, and then all the logic for that gets run. However, if he's not logged in, well, our middleware is set to respond and send a response back. And we call a return, which means we don't go through the rest of the middleware or the controller at the end. We just kill the signal and we send a response back. So that's how authentication works. And so the last thing I want to do is for index.js. First of all, I'm going to change this back to 30 seconds. You can pick 60 seconds too. Actually, let's just do 60 seconds. And let's save everything. All right. And what I want to do is, first of all, I'm going to log in. Let's delete all of our previous cookies just to make sure we don't have some kind of weird stale state. And then let's log in. So we'll log in, and you'll see that this is set to expire in 1 minute. That's in GMT, I'm in EST, so it's going to expire in 1 minute, but we're logged in. So let's actually create a new post, and let's hit send. And it looks like we are successfully able to create a post. However, if we wait 1 minute for our session to end, let's then try to see if we can create a post. And ideally, we should not be able to. So I'll see you guys back in 1 minute. All right, so it's been about a minute. Now let's test to see if we can still create a post. So if I hit send again, we should see that it failed and it says we're unauthorized. And that's because our session ended. And basically, once your session ends, you're essentially logged out. So if we log back in, it's going to create a new session. We're going to be logged in for 1 minute. We can then create another post. All right, so we've got our authentication set up. We can just decide on what routes we want to protect. So you can use this same middleware across your entire application. So for deleting or updating, we can add in protect as well. Actually, let's just add it in for everything. So even retrieving post, you have to be logged in. And, for a real world application, you ideally want to bump this up to something significantly higher, maybe a couple of hours or something like that, or even a couple of days. I'm going to keep this actually at 30 seconds, just, for testing purposes. So as we keep going with our application, I want to make sure that authentication doesn't break for whatever reason. And so from a Express point of view, we're kind of done building our application. I know it's not like a full-fledged application. It was never meant to be. I just wanted to have enough of an application so that I can show you from a Docker perspective how everything works. So this is all we're going to do. I know we don't have like a logic to assign, posts to a specific user. Right now, any user can create a post, edit any post. And so it's just one big global list of posts. But remember, the idea of this tutorial series is not about the Express application, it's about Docker. So we finished the Express application side of things. We're going to get back to the Docker side of things in the next video. So we still got a ton of things to learn, and we're also going to eventually move on to getting all of this deployed to a production setup and then show you guys some of the challenges we face when moving to a production environment.